It started like any other weekday coffee brewing, emails piling up, and a glance through the stack of mail that had been sitting untouched since the weekend. Among the flyers, pizza coupons, and HOA newsletter, there was a white envelope from the electric company. Nothing out of the ordinary, that is, until it was opened. The number on the bill nearly made me drop my coffee. Over $5,000. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, a misprint. A glitch in the billing system. Something easy to explain, and even easier to correct. I'd been living in my home for nearly 5 years, and my monthly electric bill rarely exceeded $200. Even in the peak of summer, with the AC on full blast, it was manageable. This was beyond abnormal. This was outrageous. I stared at the page, flipping it over, checking the account number and usage summary. The kilowatt usage was through the roof, literally more than 20 times higher than the previous month. I hadn't installed a Bitcoin mining farm in the basement, and I hadn't thrown an all-night rave with industrial spotlights. Something was wrong. I called the electric company that same day, half expecting to hear a bored customer service agent explain that it was a billing error. Instead, after a long hold and an even longer conversation, the agent calmly explained that the readings were accurate. The meter had logged that exact usage, and according to their data, it had been happening steadily for the past 45 days. Confused, I asked them to send someone out to inspect the meter. Maybe it was broken, or maybe someone was stealing power from my line. The technician arrived the next afternoon. He was polite and professional, walking around the property and checking the connection point, main fuse, and meter. After half an hour, he scratched his head and gave me a curious look. "This is odd," he said. "Your meter isn't faulty, but something's pulling a lot of juice from it. And it's not from inside your house. Looks like it's running out to a shared line behind your lot." Shared line? I didn't have anything connected back there. Just a small patch of grass and the community walking trail. He pointed toward a cluster of underground conduits that led to the HOA, a maintained entrance, the kind with glowing signs, security lights, and an electronic gate system. "This line feeds power to something back there," he said, "and it's coming off your meter." The realization hit me slowly, like a faucet turning on drop by drop. My electricity wasn't just powering my home, it was powering something I didn't own, didn't authorize, and had no control over. My jaw clenched. The HOA had recently installed new decorative lighting all around the neighborhood entrance, plus 2 high-lumen streetlights and a new powered irrigation system. It had all seemed a bit much at the time, but we were told the budget allowed for it. No mention was ever made of who would actually be paying for the electricity. To run it all, I took photos of the technician's findings. He even made a note in his report saying it looked like the power line was connected to non-residential infrastructure. My next stop was the HOA. I didn't care if it was a mistake or oversight. Someone was going to explain why I was now on the hook for thousands of dollars. But even as I walked back inside, bill in one hand and camera in the other, I had a sinking feeling. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. It was the beginning of a much bigger problem. One that the HOA either didn't know about, or worse, didn't want anyone to find out. After the shock wore off and I gathered myself, I decided to dig deeper into the situation. Something didn't sit right with me. The HOA hadn't mentioned anything about residents sharing the cost of powering community fixtures, and I certainly hadn't been told my specific property would be absorbing that cost. I pulled out the last few newsletters, emails, and meeting notes. Nothing. There was no mention of how the new entrance lights, security systems, or water features would be power just, that they were being installed to enhance neighborhood appeal and had been approved by a majority vote at a board meeting I hadn't attended. What really caught my attention was the timing. The electric bill spike lined up perfectly with the week the new HOA infrastructure went live. The glowing LED community sign, the dramatic uplighting on the oaks near the entrance, and the new fountains in the retention pond had all been activated just over a month ago. It wasn't a coincidence. I started talking to neighbors casually. At first, asking if anyone else had received a higher electric bill lately. Most hadn't, which only deepened the mystery. That changed when I spoke to a couple on the next block who'd recently complained about an unusually high bill, as well around $2,300. They'd chalked it up to a faulty HVAC system. But now, with my discovery, they started to question things. 2. That gave me the courage to knock on a few more doors. Over the next few days, I uncovered a troubling pattern. At least 6 other homeowners had similar unexplained spikes in their electricity bills. They were all located in lots adjacent to common areas near walking paths, gates, or decorative fixtures. These weren't random incidents. It became clear that the HOA had somehow rerouted the electrical load from these shared installations to individual homeowners' meters. And the worst part, no one had given consent. No one had even been told. The more I looked into it, the more I realized this wasn't just poor management, it was calculated. The HOA board, particularly the president and treasurer, had pushed through the upgrades under the guise of community improvement. But instead of filing permits and paying the electric company to install commercial-grade shared meters, they had opted to tap into nearby homes, quietly, discreetly, and without documentation. Probably to avoid fees. Probably to avoid having to raise dues, which might trigger a vote or protest. One contractor who'd worked on the lighting project, someone I tracked down through a business card left in the clubhouse, was hesitant to talk. But off the record, he confirmed what I suspected. We were told to tie into the nearest power source. The HOA president said it was already approved. It was easier and cheaper than waiting on the city to install a new feed. Look, I just did what I was told. I asked him if he had any documentation or emails. He said he might, and promised to check. I left him my number and hoped he'd come through. Back at home, I began compiling everything: notes from neighbors, copies of electric bills, photos of the meter setup, and the technician's written report. I wanted to be prepared for whatever. Pushback was coming. I knew the HOA would deny it, spin it, or blame it on a contractor mistake. But I wasn't going to be quiet, not with over $5,000 stolen from my account under the guise of neighborhood beautification. What started as a confusing bill had now unraveled into something much bigger. A hidden infrastructure scheme that exploited homeowners without their knowledge. And the deeper I went, the more it felt like I was about to open a door the HOA desperately wanted to keep closed. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. Well, I had never bothered to attend one before. Like many residents, I trusted that the elected members had everyone's best interests in mind. But this time, I arrived early, with a folder in hand containing documents. Photos, copies of bills, and handwritten statements from the neighbors who had been affected. My heart was racing, not just because of the confrontation ahead, but because I already suspected it wouldn't go smoothly. As the meeting room filled up, I noticed a few of the neighbors I'd spoken to had shown up too. That gave me a small sense of comfort. We sat toward the front. At exactly 7 p.m., the board members took their seats at the long folding table at the front of the room. The president, Richard Green, looked over the crowd with his usual smug composure. Flanked by the treasurer, Barbara, and 2 other longtime JD board members who rarely spoke. Richard began with routine updates, landscaping costs, an upcoming community garage sale, and the usual reminder about trash bins needing to be stored out of sight. When he asked if there were any resident concerns, I stood up before anyone else could. Yes, I have a concern. It's about the new infrastructure you installed last month, and how some of us are paying for it without our knowledge.
Ow.
Room fell quiet. All eyes turned to me. Richard's smile twitched slightly. Please state your name and address for the record. I did. Then I launched into everything I had uncovered. The $5,000 electric bill. The technician's visit, the confirmed line running from my meter to HOA property, and the identical pattern happening to other homes bordering the shared spaces. Up photos and documents as I spoke. Offering to pass them around, Richard kept his expression neutral, but leaned back in his chair with folded arms. Barbara scribbled something quickly on her notepad, but didn't look up. That's quite a story, Richard finally said. But the HOA doesn't have control over individual electrical lines. If there's a problem, it's between you and Hen. The utility company. Except the utility company already inspected it, I countered, trying to keep my voice steady. And the contractor who installed the lighting told me you gave instructions to connect it to nearby homes for power. That's theft, Richard, plain and simple. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. One of the board members asked for quiet, but it was clear the mood had shifted. I wasn't the only one angry anymore. Several neighbors stood up, speaking over each other, telling their stories. A retired couple complained about their $3,800 bill. Another woman mentioned she had to cancel a vacation because of the unexpected charge. Richard tried to wave it all off. We'll have to investigate. Sounds like a misunderstanding or an installation mistake. I wasn't having it. You didn't mention any of this in the meeting minutes. There's no transparency here. We want accountability. This wasn't an error. It was a decision you made to avoid spending HOA funds or increasing dues. And now you're passing the cost to homeowners without their consent. Barbara finally looked up. We'll put this on the agenda for a formal review next month, she said with a tight smile. In the meantime, we suggest anyone with billing issues contact their utility provider. The meeting quickly fell apart after that. People were angry. Some were shouting. A few walked out early. But as I left the clubhouse, I knew I'd struck a nerve. The board wasn't just surprised, they were rattled. They'd been caught, and they weren't prepared to face it. I didn't know what they'd do next, but I had no intention of backing down. If they thought they could ignore us, they were wrong. This was only the beginning. In the days following the chaotic HOA meeting, I realized that the board was counting on the issue dying down. They were hoping that residents would lose steam, get distracted, or be too intimidated to push further. But that wasn't going to happen. Not this time. I was angry. But more than that, I was determined. I wasn't just going to complain. I was going to prove what they did and force them to take responsibility. That meant getting organized, gathering evidence, building a case they couldn't ignore or spin. The first thing I did was contact the technician who had inspected my meter. He remembered the visit and agreed to email me his official report. When I read it, I was relieved to see how clearly he described the problem. He had written that power was being diverted from my residential meter to external fixtures associated with community structures, including the HOA gate, lighting, and security systems. He even included a map showing the cable route. That alone was powerful evidence. Next, I reached back out to the contractor who had worked on the lighting installation. It took a couple of calls, but he eventually sent me a copy of an email chain. Between his company and the HOA president, instructions were clear: use nearest accessible residential lines for temporary power. Hookup until shared box approved. It had never been approved, and the temporary hookup had become permanent. That email was a smoking gun. I began creating a file. I scanned in all documents: my bill, the technician's report, the email from the contractor, the photos of the meters, the images showing the lighting cables running into my property, and the testimonials from affected neighbors. I added in meeting notes from the last 3 HOA gatherings, highlighting the complete absence of any mention about how the new systems would be powered or who would be paying for it. There was no transparency, no vote, no permission, no notice. With the help of a neighbor named Carla, a retired paralegal, we drafted a formal complaint letter to the HOA board. It demanded an immediate investigation, reimbursement of all excess charges, and a full audit of community infrastructure tied into private utilities. We also made it clear that if the board failed to act, we were prepared to pursue legal action. But that wasn't all. We started building a coalition. I created a group chat with the affected homeowners, and we agreed to go door to door with a petition. In just 2 days, we gathered 38 signatures, more than half the neighborhood. Many residents weren't even aware of the issue until we told them. Others had received strange, unexplained increases in their bills, but hadn't connected the dots. The more we talked, the more it became clear how widespread the problem was. I also contacted a local news station, anonymously at first. A reporter named Jenna was interested and agreed to look into the story. She said she'd need more solid evidence before running anything. But the fact that she was asking questions already had the board on edge. Word traveled quickly in our neighborhood. Then came a surprising development: an unannounced visit from the HOA president. Richard showed up at my door, smiling awkwardly, and asking if we could talk privately. I invited him onto the porch, but made sure my phone was recording in my pocket. He offered vague apologies and claimed that the board never intended to burden anyone, and that it had been a misunderstanding caused by the contractor. When I mentioned the email he'd sent giving permission for the hookups, his face changed. The charm disappeared, replaced by a cold stare. He realized I wasn't bluffing by the end of the week. I had everything I needed: documents, witnesses, a legal argument, community support. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I'd become the voice of a neighborhood waking up to how it had been used. And we were ready to fight back. It didn't take long for things to come to a head. After submitting the formal complaint and gathering the neighborhood petition, HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting. Unlike the last one, this time the room was packed standing room. Only residents who had never attended before were now showing up, visibly frustrated. Bill's statements clutched in their hands, ready to speak up. What had started as a quiet discovery had grown into a full-blown community uprising. People wanted answers, and more than that, they wanted justice. The meeting opened with a tense silence. Richard, the HOA president, sat with his usual forced calm, but the look in his eyes was different now. He knew the illusion of control was fading. Beside him, Barbara looked pale, flipping through notes without saying a word. Richard opened by stating that the board acknowledges the concerns raised and had taken steps to independently review the electrical infrastructure across all common areas. Then, for the first time, he admitted the truth. It appears that, during the recent infrastructure upgrades, some installations were temporarily connected to residential power sources. Without explicit authorization, we regret this error and are working on a solution. The room erupted. People shouted questions, accusations, and demands. It wasn't just about regret, it was about theft, negligence, and broken trust. Phrase temporary connection didn't sit well with anyone. It lasted over 6 weeks. Some residents had paid thousands of dollars for electricity they didn't use. And now the board was trying to soften it with vague language. I stood up and raised my voice above the chaos. You didn't just make a mistake. You approved it in writing. We have the email. You passed the costs to us instead of following proper procedures. That's not miscommunication. That's fraud. More voices joined in. Carla called for an independent audit. Others demanded the resignation of the board president and treasurer. Someone near the back even shouted that the HOA should be dissolved entirely. The board was outnumbered, outmatched, and out of excuses. Under pressure, Richard reluctantly agreed to a vote on 2 immediate measures: the installation of commercial-grade HOA dedicated electric meters for all community-run systems, and a full financial reimbursement to affected homeowners based on verified billing statements. Both measures passed with an overwhelming majority, but the community wasn't done yet. Another homeowner, a retired attorney, proposed a motion to initiate a no-confidence vote against the current board leadership. Within minutes, ballots were handed out and the votes were cast. By the end of the night, Richard and Barbara were removed from their positions. An interim board was established. It's made up of volunteers from the community who had been actively involved in addressing the issue. Over the next few weeks, change swept through the neighborhood. The local news finally ran the story, titled "Neighborhood Power Grab: How a HOA is Secretly Shifted the Bill." It sparked a wave of attention from other HOAs and watchdog groups, some of whom reached out to share similar stories or offer support. The exposure helped ensure that the utility company prioritized the installation of proper connections and refunded service charges related to the unauthorized connections. As for the reimbursement, it came slowly but steadily. Each affected homeowner was issued a check covered by the HOA Reserve Fund. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the frustration or the hours of time lost, but it was something. More importantly, it proved that when a community stands together, no board or bureaucracy can silence it. Looking back, the electric bill that shocked me that morning was the beginning of something much bigger. It exposed how fragile trust can be when power literal and political is misused. But it also showed the strength of community, the power of persistence, and the importance of speaking up. We didn't just fix a bill, we fixed a broken system.